Welcome the stories that creep from the darkness in the darkness of the night when shadows dance in the corner of your eyes. Listen carefully because every hiss and creak might not be just the wind. Welcome to Horror Radio, where nightmares come true. The Haunted Mirror, a true story of the girl in the dead village. On the outskirts of Parry Sound, Ontario, the autumn sun had just set, leaving an orange sky that was slowly fading to gray. Ellie Tremblay, a 17-year-old girl with messy brown hair, sat on the porch of her small wooden house, staring at her phone without really paying attention. Her thoughts were drifting back to 2 years ago, when a car accident took the life of her younger brother, Lucas, who was only 10 years old. Ellie could still hear Lucas' laughter, and the guilt of asking her mother to speed up that night continued to eat away at her heart. "Ellie, are you sure you want to go camping tomorrow?" Her mother, Marie, asked from inside the house. Marie, a 40-something nurse with a tired but loving face, appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. "I know you've been spending a lot of time alone lately." Ellie nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Sarah and Jake insisted that I come. They said it would be good for me to socialize." She emphasized the last word sarcastically, making Marie chuckle softly. "Be careful then. Stay away from Black Hollow. That place, it's weird," Marie said, her tone suddenly serious. Ellie furrowed her brow, but before she could ask, Marie had already returned to the kitchen, leaving behind the faint aroma of coffee. Black Hollow. Ellie had heard the name in stories at school, a remote village that had been a mining center in the 19th century, but was abandoned after its entire population disappeared overnight in 1873. People called it Dead Village, and local legends claimed there was a mirror in the old church that showed things that weren't ordinary reflections. Ellie dismissed it as nonsense, but there was something in her mother's tone that made her shiver. The next morning, Ellie stood at the edge of the woods with Sarah and Jake, backpacks on their backs and the cold morning air stinging their skin. Sarah, Ellie's best friend since middle school, was a blonde girl with a practical attitude that could be annoying at times. She was checking the map on her phone and complaining about the slow signal. "Seriously, why do we have to camp in the middle of the woods? We could go to the mall," Sarah complained, but her eyes sparkled with adventurous excitement. Jake, who was taller than both of them and always wore the same red flannel jacket, just smiled broadly. "Because it's fun, Sarah. The woods, the campfire, ghost stories. What more do you want?" Jake was the kind of guy who was always happy, but Ellie knew he was also careless and often acted without thinking. He tied his shoelaces and whistled an indistinct tune. "Ghost stories? You just want to show off your Black Hollow story that everyone already knows," Ellie teased, trying to sound casual even though her stomach was a little queasy. She didn't like the woods, but she didn't want Sarah and Jake to think she was a coward. Jake stopped whistling and looked at Ellie with twinkling eyes. "Oh, you haven't heard the good part yet. They say there's an old mirror in the Black Hollow Church, made by an Algonquin shaman or something. If you stare at your reflection for too long, you'll see something. Some say it's a ghost, some say it's a monster, and some people who've seen it have never come back." Sarah snorted. "That's just a story to scare little kids, Jake. A haunted mirror? Seriously, let's just concentrate on not getting lost." But Ellie noticed Sarah glancing off into the woods, as if to make sure no one was watching. They began to walk into the forest, where tall pines towered above them, and a thin mist began to creep between the roots. The rustling of leaves beneath their feet was the only sound, except for the wind whispering through the trees. Ellie felt her hair stand on end, but she ignored it, blaming the cold air. Jake went on telling stories about Black Hollow, how the villagers had once made a pact with the spirits of the forest for riches, but had eventually disappeared. "Maybe they're still there, you know? Like ghosts singing in the mist," he said, trying to scare Sarah. "Jake, shut up. You're making me want to go home," Sarah muttered, but she laughed a little to show that she wasn't entirely serious. As the sun began to set in the west, they came to a small clearing by the river, the spot Jake had chosen for camping. The forest around them felt darker now, and the shadows of the trees seemed to move in the corners of Ellie's eyes. As they set up the tent, Ellie felt like someone was watching them. She turned toward the forest, but all she saw was the fog getting thicker. "Ellie, are you okay? You look pale," asked Sarah, who was pounding tent pegs into the ground with a small hammer. "I'm fine," Ellie replied quickly, forcing a smile. "It's just cold." Night fell and they sat around the campfire, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange light. Jake began to tell another story, this time in a deliberately eerie whisper. "They say the mirror in Black Hollow doesn't just show ghosts. Sometimes, if you look long enough, you can hear a voice, like someone calling your name from inside the mirror. And if you answer, you'll dash." "Jake, stop!" Ellie cut him off, louder than she intended. Her heart was racing and she didn't know why. Maybe it was the story, or maybe it was the forest, which felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Jake raised his hands and laughed. Okay, sorry. I'll stop. But seriously, aren't you curious? Black Hollow's only a few miles from here. We could stop by tomorrow, check out the church." "No, thanks," Sarah said firmly, but there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. "I want to go home alive, not become a horror story." Ellie didn't answer. She stared at the campfire, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. In the distance, she heard a sound like a branch snapping, but when she turned, the forest just stared back at her in darkness. Fog now enveloped their campsite, like a slowly closing curtain. As they prepared to go to sleep, Ellie looked back into the forest. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a faint shadow among the trees, too large to be human. But when she blinked, the shadow disappeared. She rubbed her eyes, blaming tiredness. But deep down she knew there was something wrong with this place. And for some reason, Jake's story about the mirror kept echoing in her mind, like a whisper that wouldn't go away. The morning light should have brought relief after a restless night. But when Ellie Tremblay opened her eyes inside the tent, the world outside felt wrong. Thick fog shrouded their campsite on the edge of the Ontario forest, so thick she could barely see the pine trees a few feet away. The air felt heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, a faint smell of burning wood, though their campfire had long since died. Ellie rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the night before, when she had seen a shadowy figure among the trees. "Sarah? Jake?" Ellie called, her voice muffled by the fog. There was no answer. She crawled out of the tent, her heart starting to race. Sarah and Jake's tents were still standing, but the campsite felt too quiet. The birds that had chirped yesterday were gone, and the wind that usually rustled the leaves now carried only silence. "Ellie, are you awake?" Sarah emerged from behind the tent, her face pale and her blonde hair disheveled. She was holding her phone, her brow furrowed. "No signal at all. I tried to check the map earlier, but it wouldn't load. What kind of fog is this? I can't see a thing." Ellie nodded, trying to stay calm despite the knot in her stomach. "Where's Jake?" "Still sleeping, I think. That guy could sleep through a storm," Sarah murmured, her voice shaking slightly. She looked out into the forest, her eyes searching for something through the mist. "I don't like this, Ellie. This forest. It feels strange." Before Ellie could answer, Jake emerged from the tent, yawning widely, his red flannel jacket half open. "Morning, bro. Wow, this fog is crazy. Huh? Like a horror movie." He smiled broadly, completely unfazed by the tense atmosphere. But Ellie noticed that his smile was forced, as if he sensed something was wrong, too. "Jake, this isn't funny. We can't see the trail. There's no signal." And Sarah stopped and took a deep breath. "We have to get back to the car now." "Calm down, Sarah. Fog like this is normal in the forest. It'll clear up soon," Jake said. But he started to check his pack, pulling out the compass he'd bought at the camping store. "Besides, the car is only a few hours' drive from here. We'll just head west and we'll be fine." Ellie wasn't sure if Jake really knew what he was doing, but she didn't want to add to the tension. "Okay, let's pack up and go," she said, trying to sound firm. But as she bent down to fold the tent, she heard a faint sound, like footsteps crunching on twigs, followed by a whisper so soft she could barely hear it, as if someone was calling her name. She jerked her head up and looked into the forest, but only the mist was staring back at her. "Did you hear that?" Ellie asked in a low voice. Sarah and Jake looked at each other. "I didn't hear anything," Sarah said, but her face grew paler. Jake just shrugged, but his hand holding the compass was shaking slightly. They started walking, following Jake's compass, but the fog seemed to refuse to clear. The pines seemed to grow denser, and the path that had been clear yesterday now felt unfamiliar, as if the forest had changed overnight. Ellie walked behind them, trying to ignore the feeling that something was following them. Every few minutes she looked back, but all she saw was the mist swirling like living smoke. "Jake, are you sure this is the right way?" Sarah asked after an hour of walking, her tone growing sharp. "We should have seen the river by now." "Relax, I know what I'm doing," Jake replied, but Ellie could hear the doubt in his voice. The compass in his hand was spinning strangely, the needle sometimes pointing in different directions within seconds. Maybe there's metal in the ground or something. This is an old forest, right?" Ellie didn't answer. She remembered her mother's words about Black Hollow and Jake's story about the mirror in the old church. She tried to push those thoughts away. It's just fog, just a forest, nothing supernatural. But when she took a step, her foot tripped over something. She bent down and saw a small stone carved with a strange symbol, a circle with lines like claws. Her heart raced. The symbol was unfamiliar, but for some reason she felt like she had seen it before. Maybe in a dream she had forgotten. "Ellie, come on, don't fall behind," Jake called, already several steps ahead of her. Ellie hurried to catch up, but she slipped the stone into her jacket pocket, not knowing why she did it. As they walked on, the mist began to form vague shadows, indistinct shapes, like people standing in the distance. Sarah stopped suddenly and pointed to the left. "Do you see that? There's something there." Jake and Ellie turned, but the shadow disappeared as quickly as the shifting fog. "Probably just a tree," Jake said, but his voice sounded unconvinced. Ellie felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She wanted to say she saw it too, but the words caught in her throat. After hours of walking with no sign of a river or an exit, they came to an open field that shouldn't have been there. In the fog, weathered wooden houses stood silently, their roofs collapsed and their windows empty like staring eyes. An old church with a leaning bell tower stood in the center of the village, its door slightly ajar as if inviting them in. A cracked wooden sign reading Black Hollow hung by the side of the road, barely legible. "This, Black Hollow?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "But we couldn't have landed here. This village should be far from where we were yesterday." Jake swallowed hard, but his eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Cool, right? We found the dead village. Let's check out the church. Maybe the mirror is real." "Jake, you're crazy. We need to find a way out, not go on an adventure." Sarah snapped, but she didn't move, as if her feet were glued to the ground. Ellie stared at the church, her heart pounding. There was something inside her, a strange urge, almost like a whisper, urging her to go inside. She remembered the stone in her pocket, and the guilt that had haunted her since Lucas' death suddenly felt heavier. Maybe we can find help inside," she said quietly, surprising herself. Sarah looked at her with big eyes. "Ellie, are you serious? This place is dangerous." "But we have no choice," Ellie replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "We don't know the way out, and this fog. It's not normal." Jake nodded, already on his way to the church. "There you go, Ellie, a real adventurer." But as he pushed open the church door, the creak of old wood echoed, and the fog seemed to close behind them, like a curtain swallowing the outside world. Ellie stepped inside, followed hesitantly by Sarah. Inside, the church was cold and damp, with broken pews and dust floating in the air. A narrow staircase in the corner led down to a basement, its door slightly ajar. From the darkness below, Ellie felt something calling her, not a voice, but a feeling, like an invisible tug on her chest. The episode ends with the three of them standing outside the basement door, the faint light from outside the church almost disappearing behind the fog. Jake held a flashlight, but but its light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. Sarah held Ellie's arm, her breathing rapid, and Ellie, her hands shaking, felt the stone in her pocket grow warm, as if it were alive. Deep down she knew that whatever was down there would change everything. The air in the old black hollow church felt like a held breath, cold and damp, and the smell of dust and rotting would permeated every inch of the room. Ellie trembly stood in front of the door leading to the basement, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of her chest. The faint light from outside, almost obscured by the fog, was just enough to illuminate the narrow staircase that disappeared into the darkness. Sarah held Ellie's arm tightly, her breathing short and quick, while Jake, flashlight in hand, seemed too excited for a situation that was clearly wrong. Seriously, you guys aren't excited? We're in Dead Town, bro. This mirror could actually be real, Jake said, his voice echoing in the empty church. His red flannel jacket looked too bright in the gray surroundings, and his smile, though broad, couldn't hide the glint of uncertainty in his eyes. Sarah snorted, but her voice was shaking. Jake, this isn't a game. This place makes me uncomfortable. Ellie, let's just go back and find a way out. Her eyes darted toward the church door, but the fog outside seemed to grow thicker, like a wall closing in on them. Ellie didn't react immediately. Her hand, still in her jacket pocket, squeezed a small carved stone with a strange symbol she'd found in the woods. The stone felt warm, almost alive, and the urge to go down to the cellar grew stronger, like a whisper in her head. She remembered the guilt that had always haunted her Lucas' death, her brother's death, which she felt was her fault. Maybe she thought this place knew something about her. We can't leave now, she said quietly, her voice firmer than she felt. The fog, it's not normal. Maybe there's a clue down there. Sarah stared at her, eyes wide. Ellie, do you hear yourself? A clue? We're not in a horror movie. But we can't just stand here either, Ellie replied, surprising herself with her determination. She headed for the stairs, and Jake followed immediately, his flashlight sweeping the darkness. Sarah grumbled, but eventually followed, not wanting to be left alone. The old wooden stairs creaked beneath their feet, each step sounding like a lament from the church itself. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement opened wide, dark and cold, with cracked stone walls. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, almost as tall as a man, with a wooden frame carved with intricate symbols. Circles, claws, and lines resembling eyes. The surface of the mirror was covered in dust, but there was a strange glow behind it, like light that shouldn't be there. Wow, Jake whispered, approaching the mirror with the flashlight now shaking in his hand. This is it, brother. A haunted mirror. See the carvings? Must be Algonquin or something. He wiped the dust from the mirror's surface with his jacket sleeve. Ignoring Sarah's warning not to touch anything, Ellie froze. As the dust cleared, she saw something in the mirror, not her own reflection, but the shadow of a woman. The woman had long, tangled hair, worn clothing reminiscent of the 19th century, and vacant eyes staring directly at Ellie. Ellie's heart stopped for a moment and her breath caught in her throat. You guys, are you seeing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah and Jake turned to the mirror, but their faces showed only confusion. See what? Sarah asked, coming closer. It's just our reflection, Ellie. What's wrong? Ellie blinked, and the woman's shadow disappeared, replaced by her own pale reflection. But she knew what she had seen. I'm just tired, she murmured, trying to convince herself. But the stone in her pocket felt warmer now, and there was a strange feeling in her chest, as if someone were pulling at her soul. Jake, unaware of the tension, chuckled. Ellie, don't tell me you're scared of my ghost story from last night. It's just an old mirror. Look. He tapped the surface of the mirror with his fingertips, but the sound was strange, not like glass, but like an echo from a deep, empty space. Jake, don't! Sarah snapped, but it was too late. The mirror seemed to shake, if only for a moment, and the air in the basement grew colder. Ellie felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, and for a moment she heard a faint whisper, her name. spoken by a voice that wasn't Sarah's or Jake's. That night, after rushing back to the campsite, Ellie couldn't sleep. The fog around her tent grew thicker, and strange noises breaking branches. Faint whispers became more frequent. Sarah sat near the newly lit campfire, hugging her knees, while Jake tried to stay cheerful by telling jokes that weren't funny. But Ellie could see that he was worried, too, as he kept glancing off into the woods. When Ellie finally fell asleep, she had a dream. In her dream, she was standing in front of a mirror in the basement, and the woman from before was there, clearer now. The woman introduced herself as Abigail, a resident of Black Hollow who had disappeared in 1873. Her face was filled with despair, but her voice was calm, almost pleading. "You have been chosen," Abigail said. "The mirror is not an object. It's a door. We made a deal with the spirits of the forest, and now we're trapped. Don't let it take you." Ellie awoke in a cold sweat, her breathing labored. The sky was still dark and the fog had completely enveloped their campsite. She turned to Jake's tent to tell him about her dream, but the tent was empty. "Jake," she called, her voice shaking. Sarah woke up, her eyes filled with fear. "Ellie, what's wrong?" "Jake. He's not here," Ellie said, running to Jake's tent. His backpack was still there, but his shoes were gone, and there were footprints leading into the forest toward Black Hollow. Ellie felt her chest tighten. The stone in her pocket was hot now, and Abigail's whisper from her dream was still echoing in her head. Sarah held Ellie's shoulders, her face pale. "Ellie, we have to find him, but I'm scared. This place isn't right. The mirror, I don't know, but I think you're right. This isn't normal." Ellie stared into the woods, toward the church hidden in the mist. The guilt she had carried since Lucas' death felt heavier now, as if the mirror knew her secret. "We have to go back to the church," she said, her voice barely audible. "Jake's there. I know." This episode ends with Ellie and Sarah standing at the edge of the campsite, the fog enveloping them like a living creature. The Black Hollow church looms in the distance, and Ellie feels the mirror calling to her, like a magnet pulling at her soul. Whatever lies beneath the church took Jake, and Ellie knows she may be next. The fog in Black Hollow felt like a living thing, enveloping the old church with fingers of smoke that crept through the cracks in the weathered wood. Ellie trembly stood at the church door, her hands shaking as she pushed it open. The smell of dust and decay greeted her, but the guilt gnawing at her heart about Lucas, about Jake, pushed her inside. Sarah, walking behind her, held Jake's flashlight that he had left at the campsite, its light flickering weakly as if afraid to pierce the darkness. "Ellie, this is crazy," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with fear and anger. "We don't know where Jake is. We should be looking for help, not coming back here." Her usually firm face was now pale, her blonde hair clinging to her forehead with cold sweat. Ellie turned around, her eyes full of determination despite the tightness in her chest. "Sarah, I know Jake's here. I can feel it." She couldn't explain why, but the carved stone in her jacket pocket felt hotter, and Abigail's whisper from her dream still echoed. "You've been chosen. We just need to check the cellar again." Maybe Carla already feels like the first step to the climax. Sarah snorted, but didn't argue. Her loyalty to Ellie overcame her skepticism, even though she was obviously scared. "If Jake's not there, we'll get out. Okay? I don't want to die here." Ellie nodded, though she wasn't sure. They walked to the basement stairs, the creak of old wood filling the silence. As they descended, the air grew colder, and a strange smell like blood and ashes wafted faintly. The mirror still stood in the center of the room, its surface now free of dust after Jake had wiped it down yesterday. The Algonquin symbol on its frame was clearer now, like eyes watching. Ellie approached the mirror, feeling a strange pull in her chest, as if an invisible thread was holding her together. She wanted to touch it, but the memory of Abigail's shadow made her hesitate. Sarah, standing behind her, swept the room with a flashlight and suddenly exclaimed, "Ellie, look at this." In the corner of the room, hidden behind a pile of broken wood, was a small rusty metal box. Ellie knelt down and opened it to find an old diary with a torn leather cover. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the neat handwriting was still legible. The first page read, Abigail Warren, Black Hollow, 1872. What is this? Sarah asked, leaning in to take a look. Someone's journal? Ellie opened the first page, her hands shaking. Abigail's writing detailed life in Black Hollow, a poor and desperate mining village. In 1873, the villagers made a pact with the forest spirit, something they called the Guardian of Darkness, which Ellie now suspected was a Wendigo. Based on Algonquin folklore she had heard from her mother, the spirit promised riches, but demanded souls in return. The mirror in the church, according to Abigail, was a gateway created by a shaman to communicate with the spirit. But after the deal was made, the villagers began disappearing one by one, and Abigail realized the mirror was trapping them. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, reading over Ellie's shoulder. This is really happening? The mirror, it's really haunted." Ellie didn't answer. She read on, finding Abigail's notes about the last night in Black Hollow. "The mirror called us. I tried to destroy it, but it took my soul. If you're reading this, run. Don't look at the mirror too long." The last sentence sent a shiver down Ellie's spine as she remembered the image of Abigail she had seen yesterday. Suddenly, the mirror emitted a sound, a low hum, almost like a breath. Ellie and Sarah jumped and turned toward it. The surface of the mirror rippled, like water, and for a moment Ellie heard Jake's voice calling, "Ellie, help!" His voice was distant, as if coming from a deep tunnel. "Jake!" Ellie shouted, taking a step forward without thinking. Sarah grabbed her arm in panic. "Ellie, don't. Could be a trap. You read what Abigail wrote." But Ellie felt the pull again, stronger now. Her guilt over Lucas, over Jake, made her want to act. "I have to try. If Jake's in there, I can't leave him," she said, her voice breaking. Sarah shook her head, her eyes welling up. "Ellie, you can't save everyone. We don't know what's in that mirror." Ellie stared into the mirror and saw her reflection mixed with a faint shadow. Maybe Abigail, maybe Jake. The stone in her pocket felt like a burning ember, and Abigail's dream came back to her. You were chosen. She began to suspect that the mirror knew about her past, about the guilt she carried, and that it made her vulnerable. Before Ellie could decide, heavy footsteps echoed outside the church, followed by a howl that wasn't a wolf, a deep, hungry sound. Sarah let out a small cry and dropped the flashlight, and the room was almost pitch black, lit only by the faint glow of the mirror. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, grabbing Ellie's hand. Ellie swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "We have to hide," she said, pulling Sarah into the corner of the room. Behind a pile of wood, they crouched, holding their breath as the footsteps came closer, stopped at the basement door, then faded. But the mirror continued to hum, and Ellie heard Jake's voice again, fainter now. "Ellie, hurry!" The episode ends with Ellie and Sarah hiding in the dark, Abigail's diary clutched tightly in Ellie's hands. The howling outside still echoed in her head, and she knew that whatever was in Black Hollow, the Wendigo, the mirror, or something worse, was watching them. Her guilt over Lucas and her fear of losing Jake made her want to face the mirror. But Sarah's words echoed, "You can't save everyone." For the first time, Ellie wondered if she was strong enough to face what was behind the mirror. The darkness of the Black Hollow church basement felt like it was pressing down on Ellie Tremblay's chest, like the air itself was trying to suffocate her. She and Sarah crouched behind a pile of broken wood, holding their breath after the terrifying howl from outside faded. Abigail's diary was still clutched tightly in Ellie's hands, its fragile pages feeling like the only clue to finding Jake. A faint light from the mirror in the center of the room flickered, like a watching eye, and its low hum continued to echo, mingling with the whispers of Ellie's name. Now clearer. "Ellie, come." Sarah, her face drenched in cold sweat, gripped Ellie's arm tightly. "We can't stay here," she whispered, her voice shaking but urgent. Whatever was out there, it wasn't normal. "We need to find Jake and get out of this village now." Her eyes, usually filled with skepticism, were now wide with fear, but her loyalty to Ellie kept her standing. Ellie nodded, though her chest felt tight. Abigail's journal had revealed that the mirror was a trapdoor for souls, and the voice she had heard, so real, so desperate, could be a trap. But the guilt that had haunted her since Lucas' death made it impossible for her to ignore the possibility that Jake was still alive. "We need to look outside," she said quietly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Maybe Jake ran into the woods. Sarah stared at her as if to protest, but finally nodded. "Okay, but if we don't find him in half an hour, we're gonna find a way out. Ellie, I'm serious." Her tone was firm, but there was a softness in her eyes, as if she knew how heavy a burden Ellie was carrying. They crawled out of their hiding place, careful not to make a sound. The mirror was still humming, and when Ellie glanced at it, she saw a faint shadow, not Abigail, but a taller figure with glowing eyes that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It quickly turned away, pulling Sarah back up the stairs to the main floor of the church. Outside, the fog of Black Hollow had changed. It was no longer a thin haze, but a thick sea that swirled like a living thing, engulfing the wooden houses and making the church feel like an island in the darkness. The air felt colder, and the smell of ash that Ellie had smelled in the basement was now mixed with something sharper, like rotting blood. Ellie clutched the carved stone in her pocket, which now felt like a small pulse, and tried to focus on any sound that might lead them to Jake. "Jake! Jake! Where are you?" Ellie called, her voice drowned out by the fog. Sarah joined in, calling in a hoarser voice, but only silence answered, except for the sound of a branch snapping in the distance, which made them both freeze. Sarah swept the fog with her flashlight, and the beam caught something. A large pine tree near the church, its bark torn with deep claw marks, each scratch wide and unnatural, as if made by something much larger than a bear. What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Ellie swallowed hard, remembering Abigail's diary and her mother's stories of the Wendigo, the hungry spirit from Algonquin mythology that lurked in the woods. Maybe it's an animal," she said, but her words rang hollow. She knew it wasn't an animal. The claw marks were too similar to the symbols on the mirror frame. As they walked on, the mist began to form shadows, silhouettes of people standing motionless in the distance, some wearing tattered clothes like 19th century villagers. Ellie spotted one of the shadows resembling Jake, complete with his red flannel jacket, standing at the edge of the forest. "Jake!" she yelled, running toward him. But by the time she reached him, the shadow had vanished, leaving only a swirling mist. "Ellie, it wasn't him," Sarah snapped, pulling Ellie back. "You didn't see it? This place is crazy. We can't trust what we see." Ellie took a deep breath and tried to calm down, but deep down she felt that the mirror was playing with her mind, using her guilt to pull her deeper in. The stone in her pocket felt hotter, and she could almost hear Abigail's whisper, "Don't believe what you see." That night, after failing to find Jake, Ellie and Sarah returned to the church, the only place that felt somewhat safe from the fog. Ellie sat on the floor and reread Abigail's journal by the light of a flashlight. One entry stopped her. "The mirror chooses those who carry wounds. Guilt, regret, it makes you weak. I tried to fight it, but it knew my secret." Ellie felt as if Abigail was speaking directly to her. Her guilt over Lucas' death felt like a rope tying her to the mirror. "Sarah, I have to try and talk to Abigail," Ellie said suddenly, staring at the mirror from a distance. "She knows what happened to Jake. Maybe she can help." Sarah stood up, her face filled with disbelief. "Ellie, are you hearing yourself? Talking to a ghost? The mirror is driving you crazy. We need to focus on finding a way out, not messing around with whatever this is." Her tone was sharp, but there was fear in her eyes, as if she, too, was beginning to believe that the mirror was alive. "If we don't understand what we're up against, we won't be able to save Jake," Ellie replied, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose anyone else, Sarah. I can't." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, she let her guilt spill out. Sarah fell silent, then sat down next to Ellie and hugged her gently. "Okay," she said softly, "but I don't want to lose you either. If you're willing to try, I'll go with you. But be careful, Ellie. I don't think the mirror is alive." Ellie nodded and wiped away her tears. She approached the mirror, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Abigail, if you can hear me, please help me. What do I have to do to save Jake?" The mirror didn't respond immediately, but its surface rippled again and Abigail's reflection appeared, clearer now. Her face was filled with despair, and her voice echoed like a cold wind in Ellie's head. "The mirror wants souls. Jake was taken because he was weak. You are next because of the wound in your heart. The only way is to replace the trapped soul, or destroy the mirror. But be careful. The Wendigo waits on the other side." Ellie jerked back and stepped away from the mirror. Sarah, who hadn't heard anything, looked at her worriedly. "What did you see?" "Ellie, speak." Before Ellie could answer, the howling returned closer now, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps outside the church. The mist on the window seemed to move, forming a tall silhouette with glowing eyes. Ellie and Sarah looked at each other, fear uniting them. This episode ends with them hiding behind the pews, the mirror still humming in the basement, and Ellie holding Abigail's journal, knowing that the answer to saving Jake was there but at a price that might be too high. The old Black Hollow church felt like a tomb, its walls creaking every time the wind blew through the cracks in the rotting wood. Ellie Tremblay and Sarah hid behind the pews, gasping for breath after the terrifying howls from outside subsided. The flashlight Sarah held flickered, as if afraid to touch the darkness that surrounded them. Abigail's diary, still clutched in Ellie's hands, felt like a heavy burden not just because of its contents, but because every word in it seemed to draw Ellie closer to the mirror in the basement. Sarah, her face pale and her eyes red from lack of sleep, broke the silence. "Ellie, we can't keep doing this. We've been looking for Jake for hours and now there's something out there. We have to run." Her tone was a mixture of fear and frustration, but her loyalty to Ellie kept her there, even though her body was shaking with cold and hunger. Ellie stared at the journal in her hands, her fingers tracing over Abigail's writing. Abigail's warning from her last dream, "The mirror wants souls, but you can destroy it," still echoed in her mind. "Sarah, I know how," she said softly, her voice full of determination despite the tightness in her chest. "Abigail said there's an Algonquin ritual to close the mirror's gate. If we do it, we might be able to save Jake." Sarah stared at her, her mouth open in protest. "Ritual? Ellie, do you hear yourself? We don't know anything about rituals. And the mirror, it changed you. You're obsessed." Her tone was sharp, but there was concern in her eyes, as if she feared losing Ellie the way they had lost Jake. "I'm not obsessed," Ellie replied, though she wasn't sure. The guilt over Lucas' death, her brother's death, felt like an open wound every time she heard Jake's voice from the mirror. "I just don't want to leave Jake. If we don't try, he won't have a chance." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she wiped them away roughly, trying to stay strong. Sarah sighed, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but if this doesn't work, we're leaving, Ellie. I don't care what the mirror says." Though skeptical, her loyalty to Ellie made her agree, even though her body was clearly weak after days without proper food. Ellie reopened Abigail's journal, searching for clues to the ritual. On the last page, she found a hastily written note. "The ritual to close the door requires voluntary blood, water from the sacred river, and a song to calm the dark guardian. But be careful, if you fail, the door will swing open and he will be free." The last sentence sent a shiver down Ellie's spine, but she had no choice. The nearest river was at the edge of Black Hollow, and the song, somehow she felt it in her dreams with Abigail, like a melody etched in her mind. "We have to go to the river," Ellie said, getting up. "We'll get the water, then go back to the mirror." Sarah shook her head, her face filled with disbelief. "Out? With that thing lurking? Ellie, you saw the claw marks. We don't know what's in the mist. But we can't stay here forever," Ellie replied, her voice breaking. "If we don't try, Jake." She couldn't finish the sentence, but the image of Jake trapped behind the mirror made her chest ache. Hesitantly, they stepped out of the church, the fog greeting them like a suffocating embrace. The river was only a few hundred yards from the church, but each step felt like an eternal journey. The fog swirled, forming shadows that were now clearer, the silhouettes of the inhabitants of Black Hollow, with blank faces and outstretched hands. Ellie held the carved stone in her pocket, which now felt like a small heartbeat, and tried to focus on the faint sound of the river. When they reached the river, Ellie filled an empty canteen from her pack, her hands shaking. But as she stood up, she saw something in the mist, a tall, thin figure with eyes that glowed like embers. The figure didn't move, but Ellie felt like she was being stripped naked by its gaze. "Sarah, do you see this?" she whispered. Sarah turned, but her face showed only confusion. "See what?" "Ellie, let's go." But as they turned, the howling returned, louder, closer, shaking the fog like a storm. Ellie and Sarah ran back to the church, water from the river spilling from Ellie's shaking hands. Back in the basement, Ellie tried to prepare for the ritual, though she wasn't sure what to do. She poured river water on the floor in front of the mirror, forming a small circle, and whispered the song she remembered from her dream. Algonquin words that were strange yet familiar, like a dark lullaby. But before she could continue, Sarah, standing behind her, shouted, "Ellie, we can't do this. We don't know what we're dealing with." Ellie turned around, frustration mixed with guilt. "Sarah, I have to try. Jake could be gone by now." Sarah cut in, her voice cracking. "You can't save everyone, Ellie. The mirror is messing with your mind, just like Abigail wrote." She grabbed the small hammer from the pile of wood, her eyes filled with determination. "If this ritual is dangerous, I'll smash the mirror right now." "Sarah, don't!" Ellie screamed, but Sarah had already run to the mirror and struck its surface with the hammer. The sound of the impact echoed, but the mirror didn't shatter. Instead, its surface rippled like water, and a terrifying figure emerged. The Wendigo, with a skinny body and long claws, its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah. Sarah screamed, the hammer falling from her hands, and she collapsed, her body slumping to the ground. Ellie ran to her side and checked Sarah's weak but still present breath. The mirror hummed again, and Abigail's voice echoed in Ellie's head. "You must choose, soul for soul, or the world will pay the price." Ellie looked at the mirror, then at Sarah, then at the diary on the floor. Her guilt over Lucas and her fear of losing Jake mixed with her new responsibility to protect Sarah. The episode ended with Ellie alone in front of the mirror, the river water still flowing on the floor, and the Algonquin song lingering on her lips. The Wendigo's howl echoes again from outside, closer than before, and the fog at the church window forms a silhouette that grows clearer. Ellie knows she must make a choice, continue the risky ritual or find another way. But with Sarah unconscious and Jake still missing, she feels time is running out.